television. You're going to see it cut to dark when I get to the Mad Men and Game of Thrones part of this, but real quick, just wanted to say I've watched the first 2 episodes of this season of Penny Dreadful last year. You know, I'm not really into horror movies or anything like that, but this show, it's made by John Logan, who's made a huge array of films, everything from like Hugo to Gladiator. Incredibly talented screenwriter. I've been searching for podcasts all the time to seek inspiration from him, as I am wont to do, and he's writing everything in Penny Dreadful. This is his creation, and for those who don't know anything about the show, it's basically a giant, you know, mashup of all these different kinds of characters from different lore. Some were real, some were not. You have everything from like Dorian Gray to, you know, Frankenstein, to creations like Eva Green's character, who's been like possessed by the devil at various points and goes through all these different exorcism kinds of experiences. But the show, to me, is really a study about loneliness and not feeling like you fit in a really kind of tasteful way. There's a lot of kind of gore and horror and terrifying images in the show, but in a strange way it all feels metaphorical and placed in a very meaningful way that kind of allows it to happen. I'll say in the second season, there are a few scenes in the second episode that genuinely terrified me and unsettled me, and not in a way where it felt gratuitous, the way I've kind of talked about, you know, certain scenes in the Metal Gear Solid 5 prologue doing that to me. I thought this was all justified and works very much in the show, and I just recommend everyone checks it out. I don't think the ratings are that great, but the acting's really fun. I keep enjoying seeing Timothy Dalton and Eva Green work together because, of course, Casino Royale is my favorite James Bond movie, and to see Eva Green as a Bond girl and Timothy Dalton as an old James Bond getting to act together, sometimes it's just fun to imagine him as James Bond, her as Vesper Lynn, hanging out, doing their own little Bond movie on the side. So that's fun. Penny Dreadful, check that out. I'm giving it 4 stars with a confidence of 3 from what I've seen so far, the first season and the second season. I think it's a show I'm going to want to rewatch. Cool stuff. And then very quickly, I just wanted to bring up something very brief about The Daily Show, since we're starting to get kind of towards its conclusion. I'm still watching the show every day. Almost every show, 99.9% of the shows, I really love, and I think they're doing incredible things with investigative journalism and shining light on issues that none of the other news programs are talking about, and giving it to you in such a palpable but also palatable sort of way, because a lot of this is really dark, horrifying, or angering stuff that they still are able to present to you with an edge of satire, which helps the medicine go down, so to speak. The only time in a long time that I can remember being upset with Jon Stewart was this past week or the week before, when he started talking about Bernie Sanders' nomination. Now, Bernie Sanders, as Senator of Vermont for many years, is also the longest-running independent in the Senate of all time in America. He's a self-declared socialist. He genuinely cares, and it's weird to say that, but he genuinely cares about people in a way that is really tough to say for most of the politicians out there. He's not taking money from lobbyists or Wall Street or anything like that. Corporations are something that he vehemently believes should be totally out of the political process, and he is standing by that. And if he starts to gain any traction, he's going to be facing enough flack as just like a simple pot-smoking hippie. But I was really hoping that when he got discussed on The Daily Show that Jon Stewart would bring a nice edge to it of like, oh my god, here's a guy who's stood by his principles for so many years, and how refreshing would it be to see him, you know, do well in this election. And instead, he just did a really simple, cheap bit about how his name recognition compared to Hillary Clinton is incredibly low, and Hillary's going to crush him no matter what, and he doesn't have a chance in hell. Which is a shame, especially because Bernie has been on The Daily Show several times and had some great interviews with Jon Stewart. So anyway, just a little pet peeve. I still give The Daily Show 5 stars, the confidence of 5. But man, I would love to see Bernie do well in this election, even if he only goes as far as changing the way that people are thinking about what the voters want right now. And maybe if Hillary still wins, like changing her position on a few things would be great. So that's all. Daily Show rant over. And a couple more quick things. Netflix has a great documentary series called Chef's Table. We watched the first episode of that, and it was fantastic. Just what to say about it? Just makes you appreciate food more. Like, I love cheese, and this goes into such detail about the care and love that one of the top, 3 chefs in the world puts into his meals. He's based out of Italy. And anyway, just a really cool documentary show. Check that out, Chef's Table. Also, Wildest Africa is a good one. There's a bunch of different documentary series for wildest blank, different parts of the world. Those are really well done. They really scratch that itch that I originally had filled by the BBC Planet Earth series. Check that out. Does everything I want something like that to do. 5 stars, confidence of 5. Game of Thrones tonight was another solid one. It was really nice to take a little break from everything happening at the Wall and Daenerys and focus on primarily Arya and the Lannisters, both the things at King's Landing and the stuff happening at Dorne. All that was pretty great. I don't have anything too specific to say about it because I'm mostly thinking about Mad Men now. So Game of Thrones, another solid episode, 5 stars, confidence of 5. Except now it became very clear how Bronn is going to end up in the fighting pits, which Liz and I both kind of predicted a few episodes back. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Kind of cool to see Mr. Echo from Lost back in a TV show. I don't know if he's done much TV since he asked to be taken off of Lost, but cool to see him back. I hope he has an interesting role worthy of his great stage presence this season. And I did appreciate the restraint on the part of the filmmakers in this episode for the whole Sansa scene was very well done in terms of like scripting and very in character for everyone involved, from Theon to Ramsay to Sansa. And I appreciate the restraint in not showing us anything too graphic there. The close-ups on Sansa's face and Theon were plenty. Very interesting, though, that we did not get a close-up on Ramsay's face. I think we know it just would have been a giant smile, so unnecessary. I'm starting to think more about what the big episode 9 is going to be of this season, since there seems to be something big and important every season for episode 9. My guess is this season it's going to be a raid on Winterfell, and we're going to have, you know, some kind of Peter Baelish force coming up from the south. We're going to have Stannis' force coming in from the east, and then I think we are also going to have Theon's sisters, the Greyjoys, them coming in from the west. And then, oh, of course, the wildlings or the, you know, folks from further north. That could be interesting too. Not to mention Brienne and Pod somewhere in the mix there, kind of wreaking havoc. I'm sure they'll play a big part in Assault as well. But I think, my guess is that's probably where episode 9 is headed. Okay, so Mad Men, the entire series, it's over now. I started a rewatch back in February and gone through all the episodes, and now here we are at the very final episode. What did I think of it? I'm not sure right now. My reaction is kind of, ambivalent isn't the right word, but it was just kind of like, yeah, that was fine. I mean, as a final episode, it kind of hit some standard final episode beats that you expect in most any show, like, you know, kind of happy music and getting a couple last shots with all the different characters. At the beginning of the episode, by the way, they were doing all these shots from the entire series of, you know, key moments in Dawn's life, and I was like, wait, is this going on instead of the previously on Mad Men? Because that felt a little too sappy for me. But then, you know, the actual it wasn't flashback, kind of, you know, final moments that we got with everyone at the end felt very much in the same vein. Did I cry at all this episode? No, I didn't cry at all. I was expecting something to get me teary-eyed. There were a couple moments that could have almost gotten me there, but I don't know, just didn't quite push it to that level. I am going to be thinking a lot about that final shot, if for no other reason because I think there's a lot to study there. So here's what my first reaction is from that final shot. So we see Dawn, you know, kind of beginning to come to peace with who he is. Very nice. You know, I guess we didn't need to hear him say, I'm Dick Whitman now, although I'm pretty sure everyone at that little healing place knows him as Dick Whitman since he was there with Anna Draper's daughter. Anyway, the fact that we close on that, he's starting to make peace with himself, then we cut to the 1971 McCann Erickson produced I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke commercial, possibly one of the most famous advertising commercials, campaigns, whatever, ever in the history of the world. And so, you know, maybe there's a lot you can take away from that. You can look at it as that's something Dawn could have been a part of. You could think that Dawn would have come up with something even better. You can think that that was only able to happen because Dawn wasn't at McCann Erickson, so just further proof that they definitely didn't need him. But yeah, I mean, there's been some interesting motifs this season related to Coca-Cola, and I should remember since I started watching the show again back in February, but I'm sure very early on in the show that the dream of SCDP was always to land a client like Coca-Cola. They probably call out Coca-Cola by name a couple times, and I like the fact that when Don's on his crazy road trip this season, you know, a couple episodes ago, the guy asks him to fix the Coke machine, and so little things like that were kind of fun, and Don kind of looks at it like, oh, I don't want anything to do with Coke. Whatever. So his stuff was fine. I like to think of endings as surprising but inevitable. There was nothing particularly surprising about this. I suppose inevitable is fine. No one did anything that was totally out of character. The storyline that probably satisfied me the most was probably Jones. I actually thought we might have been done with her when she walked away from McCann Erickson, and to have her kind of come back into the picture, and there's a little bit of a Deus Ex Machina thing here with, you know, more money coming in for her, and Ken coming out of nowhere to be like, hey, here's a job, help me out, use your Rolodex. All this happening in the last episode, so suddenly she has even more money than she ever knows what to do with, and then has the opportunity to really start building her own company, which ironically I always thought that was going to be Peggy's dream. And so it's interesting to leave Peggy in a situation where she's perfectly happy to stay at McCann Erickson and not put her job first and be happy in her love life. The Stan thing, again, like this is, I love Stan and Peggy as a relationship. I totally didn't care whether they stayed friends or whether they got together. I was never actively shipping them. I know the internets were like wild about like Stan and Peggy, when are they gonna kiss? So I appreciate that for them. It was a lovely, wonderful moment. All the people who were rooting for them, and there was probably crying and cheering and yeah, you go get her, man, and the way that he ran up to her office and she thought the phone had gone dead. That was very sweet, and it did feel to me a little bit like fan service, and I do wish I knew how far back that scene was planned, because I might have appreciated more if I knew that, like, right from the beginning of the Peggy Stan relationship, if Matt Weiner and the Mad Men writers knew that we were arcing toward them finally getting together in the final episode. But if in like the last season they just kind of started to pick up on the public really digging the Stan-Peggy dynamic, and they're like, oh, we should put them together, that I'd be much more unhappy about. But yeah, it was a nice nod there, because two relationships a lot of people wanted to see work. Joan and Peggy, and then of course Peggy and Stan. So to see Peggy and Stan end up together, that's great. Cool to see Peggy putting a relationship not necessarily ahead of, but equal with her job, and not striking out on her own to maintain that there. So that's cool. And then for Joan to make an offer to Peggy, which she then has to turn down, and then choosing to go ahead with her company, even if it means losing her, I'm going to call him a boy toy, a fair-weathered friend, fair-weathered lover. And really nice to see Joan there starting to build her own company, and so her arc ultimately, in the long run, becomes the most satisfying for me. And nice touch there that because she said there needed to be two names, so she uses both of her names, Harris Holloway. Nice touch. Who else? Okay, Roger's plotline ended fine. Sure, he marries Megan's mother. That's in character for him. Nothing particularly surprising. No one died in this episode. I guess I'm thinking like, yeah, Don didn't die, Roger didn't die. The likely candidates, no one died, which is fine. Pete and Trudy off onto their jet. They look so happy. He's probably going to keep cheating on her, but fine. He goes to Wichita and hangs out in Kansas. Maybe he finds out that Don was there. That's kind of fun. I find it interesting that Don didn't get much of a send-off. I'm talking about Don Draper's old secretary, because she became a really interesting character, and if they did give her a final scene that was memorable, I don't remember it. Betty and Sally's final scenes with Don were strong enough. It's interesting that a lot of characters had final scenes, I mean, especially with Don, over the phone, that a lot of those final moments had to be delivered, you know, the back and forth, and I guess maybe that built up in an interesting way to Peggy and Stan's final scene starting over the phone, and then, because they're in the same building, Stan's able to run up and they get their nice romantic moment. But yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of people would have imagined that, especially with a relationship as important as Don and Peggy, that they would have gotten to have a final moment that was face-to-face and have some kind of, you know, touch associated with it. We all remember when Peggy left SCDP, and, you know, that handhold that Don had and how powerful that was. So the fact that they were restricted to doing everything over the phone was kind of interesting. In terms of, yeah, I'm thinking more about where Don was left off, and it's interesting that the two big stories he ends up listening to while at this kind of healing place. One is from, you know, Anna Draper's daughter, who I can't remember the name of. I primarily know her as Black Canary on Arrow. But her story, and then the woman basically talking about how horrible it is if kids grow up without their mother. Don, of course, could easily transpose that to be about his kids growing up without him, and Betty's final words to him about, like, I just want to keep things normal, which means not having you around. That's gonna sting, and yet it seems like Don is okay with that to a certain degree, or he comes to terms with it, because that story doesn't affect him that much. The story that that really hits home for him is the guy that tells the story about having a dream where he's in a fridge and people keep opening the door and smiling, but they're not really looking at him. And I'm sure there's a lot to unpack there in terms of metaphors and all that, but that's the one that really strikes a chord with Don, and I guess starts to set him on a path towards self-acceptance. So, you know, I guess in some ways you could call this a whole episode a fairly traditional kind of ending. Most characters end up in places that seem pretty normal for them. No one really does anything totally out of left field, and except for some moments where characters are randomly giving characters great opportunities or a bunch of money, nothing really is the kind of thing that you couldn't have seen coming. But yeah, those final moments with the Coca-Cola campaign, especially because it's a show about advertising, I think that was a strong note to end on, and I'm definitely going to be thinking about that for a while. The final shot of Don, close up on him, Coca-Cola. You know, what's that mean? How do you reconcile those things? So, it's a great show. Mad Men was a great show. Nothing else quite like it. I don't think there will ever be another show quite like this. There's so much to unpack and analyze, and the characters were fantastic, and this is a show that I had a lot of trouble getting into at first. I found the show very cold and distant, like it wasn't interested in pulling me in or entertaining me, and I think I watched the first season probably twice all the way through before I really started to warm up to it. I wasn't interested in Peggy. Don I found kind of interesting, but his backstory stuff was strange to me, so it grew on me, obviously. Obviously I enjoy the show very much. It's definitely in my top 5 shows that I've enjoyed the most in my time watching TV shows.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I wish something in this final episode brought me to tears. I'm a big fan of catharsis. I feel that way about theater as well. But it's very possible that I'm missing some emotional resonance right now that will hit me at a later point or on further rewatches. So I haven't read anything. I literally just finished watching the episode. I haven't read anything. I don't know what anyone else is saying. I very quickly Googled the year and the advertising agency for the Coca-Cola commercial, and of course 1971 McCann Erickson, so that makes perfect sense, and also is an entirely reasonable justification for why they would choose to use McCann Erickson in the show instead of a fictional advertising agency. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling now. If I watch the show again at a later point, or I read some really interesting stuff and it changes my perception of the show, I will probably come back and give you a few more thoughts. But for now, for the finale right now, I'm giving it 3 stars with a confidence of 2, because I feel like I missed something. But the show as a whole, very much 5 stars with confidence of 5. Mad Men, great show. AMC, I don't know what you're going to do now. Good luck. Good luck, AMC. Those are my final words.